Yeah, well, keep your camera on, Simon, because our next session, you are joining John Bassilios, who is one of our directors at Blockchain Australia. This is a really interesting fireside chat panel, whatever you want to call it, really, that's coming up next. It's interesting because it's two blockchain associations from opposite sides of the world. We've got Blockchain Australia and the US Blockchain Association, who are coming together to have a discussion about the different perspectives and what's going on in different regions. So we have John Bassilios here. We have Simon Callaghan. John Bassilios is Director of Blockchain Australia and partner at Hall and Wilcox. Simon Callaghan, CEO of Blockchain Australia. Marisa Coppel, who is Policy Counsel. I can see you there. Thanks for joining us. Policy Counsel at the US Blockchain Association. And we also have Sarah Milby, who is the Senior Policy Director of the US Blockchain Association, who will be joining us as well. I'm going to flick my camera off. I'm super excited to hear about the different perspectives in the different regions. So over to you, speakers.
Yeah, thank you, Amy Rose, and thank you, Sarah and Marisa, for joining us from the US. I believe you guys are in DC as well. Thank you, Amy Rose, for the introduction of both myself and John, and hopefully everyone in Australia tuning in knows John and myself. Maybe Sarah and Marisa, would you like to introduce a little bit about yourself and blockchain, the Blockchain Association? Like what does the Blockchain Association do, and maybe a little bit about your professional background?
Sarah, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Thank you again for having me. I'm Sarah Milby. I'm Senior Policy Director at Blockchain Association. So I oversee all of our policy functions. Mostly that means I'm reading the legislative text that's coming out, the proposed rulemakings, and working with our member companies to try to find what the issues they have are, find solutions to their problems, and then deploy our resources accordingly. I work closely with Marisa, our Policy Counsel. A lot of our members, I'll just give a high overview of our membership, and then Marisa, maybe you can explain more of what BA does. But our members really are crypto native, as we like to say. So they're not big banks that have an interest in crypto. They're really US-based companies that are focusing on the space and building and providing services. So we have exchanges, we have venture capital funds, we have development teams, wallet providers. It really runs the gamut. So we're really excited to be here and represent our 111 member companies.
Thanks so much for having us. I'm very excited to be here, and I just think that it's a very cool partnership that we have. I'm Marisa Coppel. I'm Senior Counsel at the Blockchain Association, and I work very closely with Sarah, although I handle anything legal related. So I'm a lawyer. My background is mostly regulatory enforcement defense work. And so anything that falls under the legal umbrella. So that could be a comment letter in response to a proposed rule, or an amicus brief, or sending a FOIA request. But I am involved on the policy side as well, and work closely with Sarah on that front too.
Awesome. Great to have you after Commissioner Thurston as well, given the similarities in.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, she was. She is great.
I might jump in here and maybe ask you how your association is structured. In Australia, Blockchain Australia is structured as a not-for-profit organisation with members. It is a company, but it's not a company that issues shares. It's a company limited by guarantee. So maybe you tell us a little bit about your structure.
Yeah, it's similar. So we're also a not-for-profit organization, and we're a member company. So our funding comes from the dues from our members, and we are run by a board. We don't have shares like another type of corporation. So I think it's a similar structure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We work in a pretty fast-moving environment and technology. Would you both be able to give us some insight into the state of play, regarding crypto policy in Washington? Are you able? There's been a lot happening, obviously, since November and even a little before that. Are you able to give us an overview of the last 6 months and what the mood on the ground is like in DC?
Sure, I'm happy to take a first stab at that. So I think right now, everyone in the crypto space feels frantic. There's a lot of action happening on, it feels like all fronts on Capitol Hill and Washington, DC at large. So we have two big pieces of legislation moving through Congress right now. One is a bipartisan effort from the House Financial Services Committee and the House Agriculture Committee, and then the other one is a bipartisan effort on stablecoins. So both really important issues, and these are moving fairly quickly. So a lot of our attention has been focused on those two bills, at least on the Hill side. And then beyond that, there's been a lot of regulatory action with the administration at large. So through different regulatory agencies such as the SEC and CFTC, they've both been active this year, and Marisa can speak more about what they're working on, but I think we're seeing a lot of DC come together in response. A lot of what happened to FTX, I think, had a big impact here. There were a lot of headlines that grabbed attention from people on the Hill and regulators who I think felt pressure for maybe not having acted more, not catching things early enough. So we're seeing a little bit of a reaction from that right now with all the flurry of activity.
Yeah, that's like, oh yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just going to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about the first bill that you mentioned and what it's looking to do and your thoughts on it?
Yes, so the first bill is a market structure bill. Essentially what that means is it's trying to provide regulated ways for individuals to trade crypto assets or digital assets as they're referred to. It also contemplates a fundraising scheme. So I think a lot of people in our space have been struggling, particularly in the US, with the division between what is a security and what is a commodity. I think this bill is trying to find a way forward and provide clarity there so that people who are doing fundraising, they can continue to do that, but there is a path to decentralization for the networks that they're building and what it means for individuals who are using those tokens, who want to trade those tokens, and making sure that there are good consumer protections in place for them when they're accessing trading venues, when they are using custodians, et cetera. So it's a very comprehensive, complex bill, but it's very rare in DC for two committees to be working on a bill together. So the fact that House Agriculture and House Financial Services have come together for this is actually really important and shows just how much I think crypto is on the mind of people in DC.
And would it, if it's passed, would it still treat cryptos as securities in some instances, or is that not the case?
So it's a little unclear. I think it's 160 pages and there are lots of definitions within the bill, and I think everyone's still digesting it. But for now, it seems like there are two large buckets of tokens considered. There are digital commodities and there are restricted digital assets. The restricted digital assets are kind of a securities light regulation for those tokens, and those are mostly the ones coming from the fundraising schemes. So I think the underlying asset for those restricted digital assets may or may not be a security, but they're being treated like a security regardless until the network reaches a decentralized network threshold, in which case they become digital commodities.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted, Marisa.
Oh, no, that's okay. And that was like an extremely helpful breakdown of a very, very complicated draft bill. So thanks, Sarah, for doing that. I was just gonna, and I'm not sure how it works in Australia, but I mean, I would be curious for that perspective also. But in the US, we sort of have like three ways that policy can be made. One is through legislation, like through Congress, or there's like the state legislatures. And then another one is through regulatory agencies, so like the SEC or the CFTC, and they can issue rulemaking. And then this third bucket is through our court system, where judges will issue opinions, and those opinions can like shape policy in this country in a certain way. And I think we always see like an ebb and flow of how those three buckets of policy making are balanced. And right now in the crypto space, there's, I guess, like historically over the past couple of years, it's sort of swayed more toward the court system and like regulation through enforcement. And then now with this new market structure bill and stablecoin bill, we maybe are seeing like an evening out of that, which I think is very positive. But I would be curious, like if it's similar in Australia and how that differs. And I don't mean to ask the question. I know that that's
okay. Yeah. From an Australian perspective, we have quite a number of different definitions within our Corporations Act, which is the legislation that the corporate regulator works under. There is a separate definition of securities, but securities are a subset of what we refer to as financial products. And when we look at crypto, generally speaking, if there's sort of no return to an investor, then it's unlikely in Australia that it would be classified as a security. But another subset of the definition of a financial product is what we refer to as managed investment schemes. And that is the regime that was set up for what you guys might refer to traditionally as like mutual funds. And that regime is regulating basically collective investments. And its definition as to what constitutes a mutual fund is very broad. And generally speaking, any fundraising activity in the crypto space would usually fall within that definition. But no one's really treated it as such because it's clear that wasn't the intention of the legislation to cover those situations. But during the ICO boom back in 2018, 19, or early 2019, the securities regulator did take action against those who were undertaking ICOs, where the ICO was promising some sort of return, because in that case, it was clear that it was intended to be some sort of an investment product. But hopefully we're going to get a bit more regulatory clarity on this, because we did have a consultation paper released earlier this year on a token mapping exercise and how tokens might fit within the existing regulatory regime.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members are, just in a slightly different direction. The FTX fallout. There was a lot. I mean, it's an ongoing case, so I understand. We need to be careful in what we say. But the fallout's been global in Australia as well. They had an office here, and there's, I guess, the impact of the correlation that people are drawing of the impact of those political donations that were made, and the public involvement of Bankman-Fried and working with the Democrat Party more so. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, and what you can share from the Blockchain Association, what the impact on crypto's reputation in DC, how that has been impacted from the FTX fallout, and what the mood is like on the ground.
I'll take this. And Marisa, feel free to add in too. I think in general, what's been interesting is to see how the people who supported crypto and were our champions before FTX happened carried on as if, I don't want to say as if nothing has happened. I think they're now doubling down on their efforts to work on creating market structure, regulation and clarity, et cetera. But I think the crypto skeptics, this was a huge opportunity for them and ammunition against the industry, and an easy thing to point to say, look at this asset class. It's really risky. We should either ban it, like we don't need it for Americans. It doesn't make sense. You've heard Gary Gensler recently, but we already have digital currency. It's the US dollar, according to him, right? There's no need for this new asset class. But that being said, I think a lot of what we've been working on recently is a lot of the record setting. So we want to set the record straight about the facts of what happened at FTX, at least as far as we are aware right now. And obviously it's still an evolving case, and we'll see what happens in the end. But to the extent that we can show that there are good actors who are dedicated to providing safe pathways for people to trade tokens, to custody them, et cetera. I think that's what we've been focusing on a lot, especially in the last, since November. But I don't know if Marisa, you want to talk about what's else been going on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was so unique about that situation was, I mean, of course, it was like allegedly a massive fraud where a lot of people were harmed in that process. And that, of course, creates a certain sentiment among policymakers. But SBF in particular was very, very involved in policy in DC. And I think that created a level of distrust for the industry that we haven't seen before among people who had previously been supportive. I think there's just a little bit more skepticism or, comparing a certain narrative, like a use case that SBF might have put forth. And now if somebody else who's like running a very legitimate business is putting forth that same narrative or use case, there could be some more skepticism to that. But I do think like and Sarah, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this too. Like, I feel like it's getting better. And we've been working very hard to correct that narrative.
Yeah, I think that's right. And with these two pieces of legislation that I've mentioned earlier, I think the industry is really excited about them and wants them to succeed. I think there are changes in both bills that industry would like to see, but I think the fact that people are on board and want to help the process and are really putting forth their best effort to try to make it succeed is really showing lawmakers and regulators that crypto is ready to come to the table, and that not everyone in the industry thinks that there should be no regulation. Like, we want smart regulation as long as it takes into account the unique nature of the assets and how they're trading, the global nature of the markets, et cetera. So I think that's been something interesting to see as well.
Yeah, thank you. John, if you don't mind, can I just jump in and drill down on one of the earlier comments I think you made, Sarah, just around Gary Gensler and the position with and Marisa, with the position with the digital, digital money exists in terms of the US dollar. And I think it's an interesting position, particularly given, his previous involvement in the MIT Digital Currency Initiative, where he was a faculty advisor there. Are you able to comment at all on the Gensler recusal letter and from Binance and how you think, whether that's reasonable, how it might play out, or any insights around that?
I mean, I think there are numerous instances of Gensler making statements that put forth like some sort of bias. And in my view, the letter that Binance submitted, like, it's a good argument and good advocacy, like on their lawyers' part. But I think that we will start to see that issue being raised more and more, just given how certain Gensler's statements have been that, for instance, like all tokens are securities except for Bitcoin. So the more he makes those statements, I think we will see a rise in those arguments.
Awesome, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the situation in relation in the EU and regulatory discussions, debanking or political discussions around debanking?
You were breaking up there a little bit. I heard debanking, which I think both of us would be happy to talk about, but I would be curious what the whole question was.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Hello?
It's a little bit clearer.
Okay. Yeah, I was just asking about the debanking situation and what your members are experiencing in terms of debanking, and whether there's been any regulatory or political discussions around addressing the issue.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. And Sarah, definitely jump in if you have other things to add. So in terms of like how our members been impacted, I think it mirrors like how the rest of the industry has been impacted, which is there has been like a very big impact. Although I think at first meaning like in March when SVB was shut down and like it started this basically like a week of instability within the banking system, there was a lot less certainty as to whether companies and individuals would have any banking partners. Now people are finding those banking partners, but there's still an issue of diversifying the number of banking partners that you have. So that's something that companies are still struggling with. And I think that there's a general hesitancy among banks to bank crypto companies. And then in terms of some like regulatory or legislation, like addressing the issue, I believe there's been talks about like a fair banking bill to ensure that the banking regulators aren't acting in any like discriminatory manner. Nothing's been passed yet though, but it's something that policymakers are paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same here in Australia. The Council of Financial Regulators addressed the issue specifically and made a number of recommendations to government to somewhat address the issue, because you can't really force the banks to take on customers. But all of the recommendations coming out of the Council of Financial Regulators were just recently, or as early as yesterday, were basically accepted by the government. So hopefully that will see an improvement in the debanking situation in Australia over time.
Thanks. Yeah, really important discussions here in Australia around debanking, obviously, particularly over the last fortnight. Just being mindful of time, perhaps in wrapping up, Sarah and Marisa, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what the ideal outcome looks like for crypto policy in the US, and what does the US stand to lose if it doesn't get it right?
Yeah, I'll take that first. I think right now legislation is a big goal of everyone. I think there are a few issues that could really use it, and I think people are motivated to get it done right now. So stablecoins is a great example. There have been bipartisan efforts in the past on creating a stablecoin bill. There's one right now that's kind of an updated version of what we've seen. And I think Congress understands stablecoins best. So to the extent that if they were going to legislate on anything, this is, I think, the first step for them to take in terms of actually passing a bill. So I think that would be great. But in general, I think there's a little bit of tension right now between what's happening on the Hill and what's happening in the agencies, and making sure that companies and innovators are staying here in the United States and want to keep building here, while at the same time providing the consumer protection that's necessary for people to use these assets safely and to custody them securely. So I think it's a balancing act right now, but I hope that we can continue to allow innovators to stay here in the US and not move abroad where there's actually more clarity.
Yeah, I definitely echo all of that. I think we're starting to see more people move abroad, which frankly makes me sad. I like living in America, and I think that it's a great place to build a business. So I just hope that we can achieve clarity through legislation. I think that would be the ideal outcome.
Yeah, it seems the most sensible approach, and hopefully we see the same here in Australia, and our politicians are able to get themselves educated and up to speed in the technical complexities around this, new and innovative technology. In wrapping up, John, any final remarks, comments?
No, but I think that Australia is looking very closely at what the US is doing, and I would not be surprised that if whatever steps the US takes, Australia is probably more than likely to follow.
And it's a great point, because it's like we have an opportunity to be a leader in the space. And I think it would be sort of tragic to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Marisa and Sarah, thank you both so much for taking the time this evening and joining us. And obviously really keen to continue the relationship between Blockchain Australia and the Blockchain Association in the US. I look forward to connecting with Kristen as well in the future.
Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much for coming. That was a wonderful session, and that's exactly what we all needed. We are looking towards the US and carefully tracking the movements over there. So thanks, Simon and John, and Marisa and Sarah. It's been wonderful. Have a lovely rest of the evening and the day, Simon and John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.